We're blessed to have Mark Berry speak to us today. He's going to give us an apartment update. And Mark's a great guy. He does this for us annually, and it's always a pleasure to have him here. He's sort of the guy in that world. He's done roughly 5,500 appraisals in the multifamily realm here. And he's a graduate of Cal, and probably didn't have anything to do with those protests, though. All right? He received an MBA in real estate from American University, Washington, D.C. We're blessed also to have his son, Patrick, here today. And Patrick actually has a degree in engineering from the University of Colorado. And I always think engineering and appraisal, stuff like that, makes me think of Jonathan. So Patrick, we'll have you take care of the appraisals, the valuations, and keep that engineering piece. Jonathan might tackle you about engineering other things. So, but without further ado, I'd like a nice warm welcome for the Berries, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Good. Okay. I've spoken a number of times at the CCIM meetings, and I'm always so honored and privileged to be invited. But in preparing for the talk today, I have to confess, it's been one of the toughest talks to work on because it's easy to get all the stats and the figures and the employment data and the rents and the permits and what's happening with values. The hard part is what's going on in the political arena. And there is so much changing right now. So that has truly been one of the hard parts about working on this speech today. There's so much uncertainty. On the federal side, we got the Trump administration coming in, and we have a big jump in interest rates in the last 90 days. Somewhere, one of the lenders today was telling me about 70 basis points on some of his loans. We also have a lot of uncertainty. What's going to happen with the Fed? Also with the tax policies of the new administration. Also, what's going to happen with unemployment and the impact on the economy. We also, at the state level, we have 6 housing-related bills that are going to be coming up in this session. And the hearings start tomorrow on rent control and some of the no-cause eviction. Also, the city of Portland, we've seen a rapid shift in the balance of power and a rapid shift on which way the wind is blowing, which way how the tide is coming in. So a lot of changes going on. In the city of Portland, I have never seen things change so fast. We had our new commissioner, Chloe Eudaly, come in on a rent control platform. She came out of nowhere to knock Steve Novak out. We also have had a shift in the balance of power on the city council. I think that was shown by the 5-0 vote this last couple weeks on the tenant relocation costs. We've also had a lot more power for the tenants union. And anyone who's looked at the Facebook page or the website of the Portland Tenants Union will see that. There's been a lot of press the last couple weeks about 2 apartment projects, in particular the Titan Apartments and the Normandy Apartments. The Titan Apartments had some evictions and rent increases, but that was rescinded this week. Also at the Normandy Apartments, the city council took the unprecedented step after the new owner came in and doubled the rents of allocating $48,000 to cover the rents, the shortfall for some of the tenants. We've also had solidarity protests by the tenants union. So things are changing. We've also had the tenant relocation expenses mandated by the city of Portland. We've had rent control come up as a possible issue. We've had inclusionary zoning. We've had issues with unreinforced masonry buildings, and we've had changes in the parking requirements. So as one major value added, Portland apartment investor said this last week to me, the ball game has changed. Today, I'd like to talk about what I consider some of the major trends impacting the apartment market in 2016 and give you some thoughts kind of where I see the market going this next year or in 2017. Specific topics include vacancies, rents, income, expenses, apartment sales volume, apartment values, and then some trends for 2017. In looking at the apartment market, some of the major influences include interest rates, employment, home ownership, and apartment construction. And I'd like to cover interest rates and employment. Patrick will be covering apartment construction and the home ownership ratio. Now, and I think if you follow these 4 areas, you're going to have a pretty good idea just what's happening with the apartment market. As far as interest rates, we started the year at about 3.8% for mortgages. It dipped down to about 3.6% in October, but it's up about 55 basis points since that time. There's been a big jump since the election. 10-year treasuries are up almost 100 basis points since August, and currently are about 2.4%. Now, I'm a believer that if you follow the interest rates closely, you can relate these to cap rates. And it's particularly true on bigger projects and more investment grade projects. But if you look at the chart here, you can see the spread is pretty consistent. It's somewhere around 2.5 to 300 basis points on the spread between the BAA bond and interest rates. So it tells me that this is a good indicator of or in cap rates, a good indicator kind of where cap rates are going. If interest rates go up, cap rates will typically go up as well, and obviously a huge impact on the entire real estate market. Just to give you a quick example, if cap rates decline from 6% down to 5.5%, the value is up about 10%. But the reverse is that if the cap rate goes from 5.5 to 6, values will go down about 8%. So it has a particularly big impact on institutional sales, and I think it also has a huge impact on REITs. And later in this discussion, I'm going to discuss a few publicly traded REITs and just the impact. Now, the last 90 days, it's been a little tough getting a handle on how this is going to impact the market. And part of the reason is that a lot of the deals that have been done since the rates went up, the rate's been locked in. We've had slightly higher loan costs nationally. Nationally, we've also had a report of slightly lower LTV, some delayed refinancing, modest price adjustments, maybe moving down a little bit in the yield curve on the rate one gets. And also, we've had slow CRE sales, very slow nationally in January, and one of the slowest we've had in about 3 or 4 years in Portland in the month of January. So let's also look at the national economy. Currently, unemployment is about 4.8%. Strong market, a lot of optimism, both nationally, statewide, and locally here in Portland. After the speech last night, the stock market, last I checked, was up about 350. It's up over 21,000. And there's just a lot of optimism going on around the country and Oregon and locally here in Portland. If you look at the national figures, you can see that employment, we added about 250,000 jobs 2 years ago. 3 years ago, in 2015, we added 225,000 a month. And last year, we added 185 a month. So it's slowed down a little bit. Corporate profits are up almost 3% the last year. GDP has been soft. It was up about 1.6 this last year, and this versus about 2.6% the previous year. As far as the Oregon economy, who saw the article in today's paper? Anyone? Absolutely amazing. Unemployment at the lowest point in 4 decades in the state of Oregon. So it dipped down to 4.3%. Just unprecedented that our unemployment rate has been that low. We've added about 53,000 jobs over the last year and well above the national average. It slipped a little bit in 2016, just like what happened nationally and in Portland Metro. Okay, so let's talk about the Portland economy. I think one of the big changes the last year is that all of a sudden, Portland is starting to get some respect. We've been, for many years, kind of a backwater Now, all of a sudden, we're clearly not a primary city like San Francisco or New York or Chicago or LA, but we're in that secondary tier. And that's been a big step up for us. We're in the tier of cities like Denver and Austin and Charlotte, San Diego, maybe San Antonio, and some of these cities where a lot of money is coming into Portland. We're considered kind of a secondary market. Maybe the yield is just a little bit higher than some of the primary markets, but a lot of capital has flowed into Portland. Portland was ranked as the 5th best place to do business by Forbes this last year, and the recent ULI report ranked Portland as the 3rd best place to do business. We had strong job growth in 2015 with 35,000 jobs, and we had good, very good employment growth in 2016 with about 30,000 jobs. Unemployment rate a little over a year ago was 5.1%, and now it's 4.3%. In looking at the job figures, mid-year, things slowed down in Portland and nationally. And it looked like maybe the tide had turned. But the 4th quarter was very strong in terms of job growth, both nationally and in Portland Metro. A couple things have happened on the economic front. 2 major companies are getting acquired. We'll see what kind of impact this has on Portland. Portland seems to be a branch office town rather than a headquarters town. And unfortunately, with the acquisition of these 2 companies, that trend is continuing. Well, so much for discussion of interest rates and employment. I'd now like to turn it over to Patrick Barry. Patrick will discuss home ownership and apartment construction as well as a couple other issues. Patrick writes what is considered a pipeline report on what's going on in apartment construction. I think there's some copies out there, but I think he has probably as good a handle as anyone in town on what's happening in the apartment construction arena. So Patrick?
Thank you. So the first thing I want to address is home ownership. It's a very important consideration, often overlooked, is the ratio of home ownership. Nationally, we peaked out about 69%, have since dropped to about 64%. We appear to bottomed out in early 2016, and we've been on the rise. Portland, we bottomed out well below national averages at about 59.5%, but since then we've climbed about 2%. And it's important to keep in mind that in Portland, a 1% increase in home ownership means there's 8,000 fewer households renting. And these are not individuals, this is households, so this is units. This can have a massive impact, and this is really what drove the low vacancy rates after the recession. So let's look at apartment construction. 2015, we saw permits for about 6,700 units. 2016 spiked up to 7,350, and this is going to be the busiest year since 1997, and the inclusionary zoning is helping fuel this. As Mark mentioned, on your tables is the fall 2016 report. My spring 2017 report will be coming out soon. Most of the activity remains in Multnomah County in Portland, followed by Washington County. We're seeing some signs of life in East County and Gresham and Clark County. Still not much going on in Clackamas County. Our figures show there's currently about 10,000 units under construction, but there's 32,000 units proposed. And this figure may be a little hard to believe, but in January, in December or January of this year, the permits increased by 7,000. And this is leading up to the February 1st deadline of the IZ zoning. So, and these aren't rough figures. I follow the permits and itemize all these projects on our report. So why has the apartment market been so strong? Low vacancies, increasing rents, strong economy, record-setting values, and a strong appetite from institutional investors. But also, we've seen a wide margin between cost of construction and value, and that's the primary driver. So inclusionary zoning passed in February. For any of you not familiar with this, this requires developments of 20 or more units to include some portion of affordable units. This number can be between 10 and 20% of the units in the building based on how affordable the units are. Prior to February, Oregon and Texas were the only 2 states that barred inclusionary zoning. So while IZ is common throughout the nation, a lot of experts say that the Portland requirements put a much larger burden on the developer than other cities. In return, the developer can get property tax abatements on these affordable units. They can get waivers on SDC fees. They can get some exemptions to parking and also get bonus FAR and height limits. Keep in mind this only impacts properties of 20 or more units inside the city of Portland. So what's the impact? Well, too early to tell the impact. But no question that there's going to be a lull in permit applications. We expect to slow down for at least 12 months as kind of the dust settles and everyone figured out what's going on. I recently spoke with two large developers, very large developers, and they said that they're done developing units in Portland for at least 12 to 18 months until people figure out what's going on and a few projects get out of the ground. I was a little surprised by this article. It just came out February 13th, just how quick the impact was seen. They spoke to 5 large architecture firms in the city of Portland, and between all 5 of them, they had 2 apartments actively under design, which is a huge drop from just 6 months ago. National developers, they'll figure this out. They deal with this in other states. They'll get through this. It's the local mom and pop developers or the single family builder who's now building low-rise apartments. The administrative side, the income verification, the reporting, the compliance, I'm just not sure that they're prepared to deal with this. This is a project I wanted to highlight. It's up on Northeast Deacom Street. This is a modular construction. So if you look in the top right corner, that was on a Tuesday, and the picture below it was on Thursday. They bring in these modular pieces on a flatbed truck and drop them into place, and the units are completely finished. They're pre-wired, flooring, appliances, everything's already in. So all they have to do is drop them into place. Talk about land values for a minute. We've seen strong increases throughout the metro area over the past couple of years. This sale caught my eye. This is over on 28th and Division. This sold in September for about $205 a square foot, which comes out to about $41 a unit. I talked to a few brokers who described a spike and a rush in the second half of 2016 for developers to acquire land and entitle it prior to the IZ zoning going into effect. No question that we expect an adjustment in land values for sites that should be developed with more than 20 units. In terms of what this is, I'm not really sure. But just remember that land is the final agent of production here. Your labor costs aren't changing. These buildings aren't costing any different. Your capital costs are only going up. Your entrepreneurship or your profit staying the same. So that land value is going to increase or decrease to make your project pencil out. And while there's been no sales, I don't expect the IZ zoning to, the IZ projects to boost values at all. So what's happening with vacancy rates? Nationally, we've stabilized kind of in that low to mid 4s. Locally, we're a little lower than that. U.S. Census Bureau, as for the fourth quarter of 16, has us at 3.1%, which is the 4th lowest out of the largest 75 metro areas. Multifamily Northwest has us at 3.8%, but this information is a little dated. They should be coming out with updated figures pretty soon. So despite all the new construction, vacancies remain relatively low, but no question that we do see an increase coming. In our travels, we see a few soft spots, mainly the areas of high construction. So northwest, close in northwest, close in southwest, southeast, northeast, north. And the soft spots are mainly at the new units or the existing units that have been upgraded to a point where now they compete with the lower end of the new units. We're hearing longer vacant times, expanded marketing efforts, and no more units being rented sight unseen. And at properties where the owners really push the rents, they're having trouble re-renting the unit at the same rent they previously had. This may be seasonal, this may be due to the weather, or it may be due to the new units coming on board. I think this spring or summer will give us a better idea. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but the new survey comes out soon, but the previous survey had lowest vacancies outside the core, Tualatin, Tigard, Gresham, Vancouver. And if you look just at the 5 urban submarkets, they were at 4.9% vacancy, so we expect this to bump up a little bit. No oversupply in unit types. Studio showed the lowest vacancies, but that's expected, or the highest vacancies, that's expected. We expect the urban core to transition to more of a market imbalance, and we expect the suburban to remain a very tight landlord's market. So what's happening with rents? After years of double-digit rent increases, we're finally back to single digits, still near the top, but in single digits. This report has us at about 6.0 for 16 and forecast 6 also for 17. Collier's had us up 5.4%. Multifamily had us up 9%. So everyone's kind of right in the same range. Don't confuse this with income. We usually see income up closer to 3 to 6% at these properties. And there's no question that this drastic increase in rent has caused real pain in the market. This map's a little bit dated, but this shows the percent rent increase from 2011. Notice North Portland, probably the city's most vulnerable residents. They're up 71% since 2011. This is also the district of House Speaker Tina Kotek. But there may be some relief in sight. CoStar produces this. These are real-time rents, and we show a flattening out in 16. We're also seeing concessions creeping back in. Prevalent at larger projects, anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Heard yesterday about a project offering a $1,000 gift card if you signed a lease within 24 hours of touring the unit. We're starting to see some concessions at existing properties. This is offering 2 weeks, but we're seeing anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. Again, this may be seasonal. This may be because of the weather, but it could be the new normal. The political climate has shifted, as Mark alluded to. Clearly, the power lies now with the tenants. Tina Kotek is pushing for statewide cap on rent hikes. Her district of Portland, as I said, have seen the highest rent increases in the city. She's also trying to lift the ban on rent control. We're seeing much more aggressive stance by tenant groups. The tenants of this property actually showed up to his front door. New commissioner, Chloe Udaley, ran on a platform of renter protection. And we're seeing landlord groups are preparing for a heated battle in the coming months. They're soliciting funds. And then, just in February, we got, with little notice, the Portland City Council approved tenant relocation and no-cause eviction fees. This is for any no-cause eviction or any rent increase above 10% in 12 months. These fees range from $2,400 to $4,500 per unit. Details still being sorted out. Craig, I don't know if we can. It's supposed to be temporary through October, but there's a lot of skepticism that this will be extended farther. This will have the biggest impact on the self-managed properties with markets with rents well below market. You can have years of 10% increases to get back to market, and you still won't get there. Limits the ability of the value-add investors, and while the sales side isn't known yet, the impact on the sales side, I don't expect it to help values at all. We're hearing that some buyers, especially buyers out of California, are having some hesitation entering the market due to increased regulation, and they see this as just the beginning. So my slides won't advance anymore, but I'll just finish up. Shortly after all these fees were announced, we had a developer come out and say this is adding $100,000 to their project. We had a lawsuit filed by a couple major players in the Portland metro area. We even had news organizations like OPB calling out, identifying owners, calling them out, digging into their past to kind of get some dirt on them. And just yesterday, the property at the center of all this controversy rescinded all their rent increases. Based on my conversations with property managers, the issue is not with the penalty for the rent increases, as 10% in this market is a pretty substantial rent increase still. But the problem is with the no-cause evictions. I had a good quote from a broker. It said, most investors don't seem to be concerned with the 10% limit on rent increases, but rather the elimination of no-cause evictions. Owners are upset that local politicians don't realize the percentage of no-cause evictions in order to rehab a unit is small compared to the no-cause evictions being used to get rid of a bad apple tenant. So the issue of unreinforced masonry buildings, with all this other political stuff, this has kind of been pushed to the back burner. But this is also could have a huge impact on apartments. The city is developing a plan to force owners of unreinforced masonry buildings to seismically retrofit their buildings. They assign priority levels with schools and hospitals being at the top and apartments falling somewhere in the middle. There's no dispute on the science, but the dispute lies in how extensive the retrofitting requirements will be, and that explains the variation in the costs. They're trying to offset these expenses with either subsidies, low-interest loans, grants, tax abatements, phased in over 20 to 25 years. But the cost is $30 to $70 per square foot on some of these urban properties, which represents 10 to 20% of the total value, with really no value add and no ability to increase rents after these retrofits take place. But it's hard to really define the discount because there's been so few sales of these buildings in recent years. So I'll turn it back over.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Before I start talking about what's happening with apartment sales, I'd like to briefly talk about expenses that are impacting the apartments. Let's talk first about property taxes. Just yesterday, it was announced that the school board had unanimously decided to put on the ballot the $790 million bond measure for the schools. Now, if you look at how this will impact them in terms of property taxes, you're looking somewhere around 1.4 mils per thousand, and so it will come out to about 6 to 7%. And then you add in the cost of the recent low-income housing measure that was approved previously for $260 million, plus a normal 3%. My guess is we could look at property taxes somewhere, maybe increases in the range of 9 to 10% this next year. Part of the low-income housing funds, $260 million was allocated, but they recently spent $47 million of that for the Ellington apartments over by the Rose City Golf Course and paid about $180,000 a unit. As far as utilities, they've been fairly stable this last year. The new normal seems to be closer to maybe $90 to $100 per unit per month. And if you get family complex with a lot of grounds and wash-dry hookups, you can be up to maybe $120 or $150 per unit per month. The advertising costs have been very stable. And there haven't been any other big items that have impacted the expenses. Okay, so what's happening with apartment sales? Really, there are two ways of looking at it. We can look at it based on the number of transactions or the dollar volume. But let's first look at the number of transactions. Last year was a record year. We did 285 apartment sales for the entire year. It slipped, and it was, by the way, it was a record year. For 2016, it was down about 7% and down to about 265. So even though it slipped a little bit, it was the second best year we ever had. So it was certainly a very good year for apartment sales. It's too early to tell for year-to-date 2017 what's going on because we only have the figures for January. But January, and I'll discuss this in just a minute, January was slow, both in Portland and nationally. Okay, what about dollar volume? This is what's amazing, is that if you take the figures, say, through September, it looked like we're going to be on track for maybe $2 billion, maybe $2.25 billion. But we ended up the year with over $3 billion in apartment sales. And what happened was we ended the year with a record number of sales of large properties of $50 million and up. If you go one slide forward there, yeah, you can see what happened here. And this absolutely amazed me when I was working on this talk. In all of Portland's history, we have never had more sales for $50 billion and up than what happened in the last quarter. And these are the sales by quarter going back to, it's actually 2011. So we have never had more than 4 sales in one quarter of $50 billion and over. We had 12 sales in the fourth quarter of 2016. So it pushed the market up. I think let's see here. So why have the apartment sales been so strong? I think Patrick alluded to some of these things. There are a lot of the new apartments that are being built with the intention right out of the box of selling the property. And in many cases, there's a broker-developer alliance where they position the property and get it all teed up before it's completed. And then once it gets ready to rent and stabilize, they're all ready to go. So a lot of the new stuff is being built for sale. Also, values are at record highs. Demand has been incredibly strong. And the window has been wide open for if you have an apartment for sale. if you're a seller thinking about selling, or if you're on the fence, or if you have an estate issue, or if you have a property that maybe isn't working out in your portfolio, this has been a great time to get out. There's also been a big margin between construction costs and value, and even construction costs when you're all in. And we do a lot of proposed properties, have really good data on the costs and compare that to value, and I know how big those margins are. Okay, so what about, we've gone over what's happened with sales. 2016 was a very strong year, a great year for brokers. What about apartment values? I think if you look nationally at what happened, you'll see that commercial real estate has been very strong the last few years, and basically has doubled since the trough, which was somewhere in 2009 there. The second chart is really the same chart, shows the same thing, but it shows a doubling of commercial values. So what about apartments? Apartments have been the darling of the nation. And if you compare what's happened with commercial versus apartments, you can see here that this is the commercial, the blue, and the yellow is apartments. So apartments have outpaced what's happened with commercial properties. Now, I want to just digress for a minute and talk briefly about a couple real estate investment trusts. VNQ, this is an index fund run by Vanguard. What they do is invest in REITs all across the nation. It's very diverse, and it's a tremendous fund. I think this is probably as good an example of what's happened with institutional values nationwide and real estate investment trusts. You can see that it's actually slipped a little bit since the interest rates have gone up after President Trump took over. It's down about 5% since September. If you look at one other REIT, Equity Residential, one of the biggest apartment REITs in the nation, and Equity Residential was very active in Portland, had a lot of properties, but they've gotten out of Portland. And I think they're probably as good as they and United Dominion and some of the others are as good as any indicator of what's happening nationally with some of the investment grade properties of this caliber. And you can see that they're down about 10% the last year. Okay, so what about Portland Metro? What's happened with our values here? Well, if you take every sale of every apartment from 2007 through 2016, and then the first part of 2017, you can see what's happened here. And it was fairly flat from 2007 to 2013. It moved up a little bit in 2014. 2015, 2016 have been very, very strong. The median price per square foot in 2015 was about $121. The median price per square foot this last year was $134, so about 11% increase. Now, the trough of the market was back in 2010. Values are up about 65% since then, or somewhere around 9% per year. The figures here include 2017. It's really misleading because there have only been like a dozen sales so far for the first month of the year, so it really is not relevant. So what about some of the submarkets? What's happened there? One of the submarkets would be units, say, built from 1960 to 1980. And this submarket was slow to come back. It also is up about 65% since 2010, which was the trough. What about East County? Now, East County, we do a lot of work out there. And I like to think I know that market pretty well. East County got clobbered during the recession. It got hit really hard. And values went down where there were plenty of sales all day long in the 50 to 60,000 per unit range, and some sales south of 50,000 a unit. Now it seems like there's almost nothing out there that sells for under 100,000 a unit, and it's hard to look back and say, gee, was it really that low out in East County? East County has basically doubled since the trough, which was about 2009, and it's up about 20% this last year. A quote from one broker I'd like to read you. The per unit went from around 50 or 60,000 just a few years ago to now, where anything that is halfway decent will sell for at least 100,000 a unit. Then the broker goes on to say, these were properties that no one wanted a few years ago, even in the 50 to 60,000 per unit range. So East County, it has been amazing what's happened out there in terms of values and some of the prices. Okay, another market is the suburban markets of properties built from 1960 to 1985. And the only reason I picked this is that it gets out of the urban area, which I didn't want to distort the values. And also, this was the golden age of apartment construction in the Portland area, really from about 67 to maybe 1980. So it has a lot of the old T111 buildings and the Randall and the Culver and the Pollock and all the big builders in Portland. So what's happened with this market? This market is up about 70% since the trough in 2010, and it's up about 13% over the last year. So virtually all the markets have been strong. If I were given this talk 6 months ago, there were a few pockets that might have been a little weak, but the market has been very strong the last couple quarters. And really, I don't see any soft spots out there in terms of values. Okay, what about cap rates? Well, cap rates have been flattening out. It seems like the median cap rate is now about somewhere around 5.4, 5.5%, somewhere around there. And it's been fairly steady. What's really happened is that cap rates may be steady, but the income's gone up. So if you apply the same cap rate to a higher income, you get a higher value. I picked just a couple sales here. One of them, I know that one of the brokers here was actually involved in this. The Santa Lucia sold for about a little over $260,000 per unit, a cap rate of about 5. This is a property in Oregon City, just typical sample, sold for $125,000 a unit. Not a bad property, but the unit sizes are modest. It's just kind of a middle of the road property, but it shows you how strong some of the values are. In looking at a couple other markets, this is a property out in East County, which has sold a couple times in the last few years, but the last sale was in 2014, and it's up about 41% since that time. This is another property that it's interesting. It's sold multiple times in recent years, and it's almost doubled in 3.5 years. So you've had quite a few people like this kind of that are not buy and hold, but really buy and flip. And so this is probably a good example of some of that. So, I mean, some of the things that buyers are reacting to the market being so hot, I see them going further out. They might go out to Longview, which has been soft, out to, say, Woodburn or Forest Grove or maybe Silverton or out to the coast, just because you get a little better yield and a little better value. I've also been a little surprised. I've been doing this for a while, and as an appraiser, you like to think that certain properties have a discount, whether you're floodplain or maybe you're next to a gas station or maybe there's a marijuana place next to you or a busy street or a broken condo or gang activity. All these things that are just kind of natural things that you say, gee, this is not the property I want to get, but it seems like people are ignoring these. And one of the owners in here purchased a property in the floodplain. And he told me and this property was 3 feet underwater during that terrible flood. And I kid you not. but he was telling me that the only discount they applied to this property was the amount of the flood insurance. So it seems like the market is not discriminating like it used to. So certainly there's been concern about being in a real estate bubble. And I think it's gotten some press recently. The Boston Fed chief got some, came out and was speaking about that. So I think the next question I'd like to ask is, are we in a bubble? Well, I just did a little research on some of the characteristics of a bubble. And maybe we can go through this and we can each think in our own mind whether these things are true or not. Rising prices when rents don't rise at the same rate, or don't rise, or at least not at the same rate. A plethora of buyers looking for a quick sale. Certainly there's plenty of that. Job growth not in keeping with the pace of real estate product coming on the market. We've had pretty good job growth, so that's probably not true. Rapid and high appreciation rates. It's probably true. And values excess of replacement costs. And someone who sees a lot of construction cost figures, I can tell you right now that there's a big margin between value and replacement costs. So are we in a bubble? Well, I think it's a pretty simple answer. The answer is no, if interest rates stay low and the economy stays strong. And the answer is probably yes, if interest rates move up and the economy goes south. But it's not just, and also in looking at the price per square foot, we did a linear regression analysis. And I'm a believer in the theory of returning to the mean, that things are eventually going to get back to normal, whether it's the weather or the batting average or the stock market or temperatures or rainfall. So let's just look at what's going on with apartment values. If you take the median price per square foot back to 1989 and you do a linear regression analysis, you can see every time it dipped below the line, it moved back up, and every time it went above the line, it moved back down. The problem right now is that we've jumped well above that linear regression line. So the real question is, and it's happened not only on the price per square foot, but also on the price per unit. So you get a pretty similar pattern. And I think the real question is it different this time? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think time will tell. But in terms of inflated assets, it's interesting that it's not only real estate, but if you look at the stock market, and I'm certainly no expert here, but I can pull these charts pretty easily. If you look at the price earnings multiple, it's currently, what is that, about 25, 26? No, it's 29. So the 29 price earnings multiple, if we go back to the dot-com years, things got pretty out of control. But if you skip the dot-com years, it's the highest price earnings multiple since the Great Depression. So it's not just real estate, it's other assets as well. All right, so what about CRE activity? What's going on there? Well, if you take the first part of 2017, it's been a little soft. And you can't really judge that by what's just happened. Really, we only have the data for January, maybe a little bit of February. So it's really too early to tell. But I think we're getting some indication nationwide that investors are pulling back on commercial, pulling back a little on commercial real estate. Also, again, 1 month you can't tell, and it was a lousy month in terms of weather in January. But if you look at January, what were there, 12 or 14 apartment sales, and it was the slowest time, if you take the sales per month, going all the way back to 2014. So slower activity, it's something as an appraiser I want to keep a pretty good eye on. Okay, source of funds. Now, This company happens to be a big investor and owner of Portland apartments. But you and I can invest them on the New York Stock Exchange. We can go down to the broker and you can put in your 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever you want to put in with them. But I thought it was kind of interesting, a couple of things here. One reason I talked about all the sales 50 million and over, it's this kind of money. It's not local money, it's national money. You know, New York and LA and Chicago and San Francisco. So, and it's from institutional money that requires a much lower yield. In looking at the yield of this company, I see that the current yield is 2.1% on their distribution. They also have expenses of 0.8%, and that's on the assets. So it's not on income. So if you figure the asset is worth 10 times the income, the management fee just for the managing the REIT and not the property is about 8%. So there's a lot of money here with these kinds of players. So where are we going in 2017? Well, I think really I'd like to talk about 4 things: interest rates, employment, apartment construction, and home ownership. Let's first talk interest rates. Now, I'm not going to get up here and kid you for a minute that I know what's going on with interest rates, but anybody can read the paper, and you know, our own Bill Connerly is generally forecasting up about 50 basis points in mortgage rates the next 2 years. I think if the Fed has clearly tipped their hand, and everyone is talking about that. There's supposed to be 2 to 3 increases next year. It's not supposed to happen at the March meeting, but may happen at the June meeting. So the general trend is that interest rates will be gradually creeping up. The figures I'm seeing are somewhere in the maybe 50 to 75 basis points. If you look at Goldman and Wells, their figures are for about 100 basis points over the next 2 years. Another thing going on is that with the economy being so strong, I think the Fed is going to have plenty of reason to support and to cover themselves when they do raise rates. Wages are now going up about 3% per year, which is more than the 2% target, and indicates a tightening labor market. Okay, employment. Now, I have a lot of respect for Josh Lerner and the people at the state of Oregon. I think they do a superb job. And keep in mind, in Oregon, we did about 53,000 jobs last year. Portland Metro, we did 30 a year ago, and then 25,000 in 16. So what they're forecasting is that it'll slip a little bit. If you take these figures and apply them to Portland Metro, it would indicate jobs about 25,000. 25,000 are darn good numbers. They're a little down from the last 2 years, but still that's solid growth and what I consider nothing but good news. Home ownership is something that who knows where it's going. And it tends to kind of go in cycles, but the general trend the last 2 years, 3 years has been going down. Going up. And that's not a good thing for the apartment market. I think that's something we want to watch closely, and that could have some impact on the apartment vacancies. Apartment construction, I think, is much easier to understand. And you can get a handle on the numbers. It's a lot of legwork and shoe leather. But my guess is that even though we had very high apartment construction this last year, we're going to have continued high apartment construction in the next 2 years. My guess is, just based on the numbers Patrick has, somewhere in the 7,500 to 9,000 units. And I think we're going to see a little bit of pullback in the city just because Portland's made it a little tough with some of the new requirements, but I think we're going to see more apartment construction out in the suburbs. Apartment vacancies, we're in a cyclical industry. It goes up and it goes down. I can't help but thinking that the most recent numbers, if they were available, would show a slight uptick. I think we're going to have some pretty good numbers coming up the next 30 days. And my guess is that we're going to see a gradual slight increase. As far as rent increases, just the sentiment on the street is that, hold on to what you got, and keep your tenant in there, keep them happy. If you can get a slight little bump, more power to you. But one of the owners here was telling me that they've had to pull back a little bit in the urban area just because they've been slow to rent. And something's better than nothing. And it's better to go from maybe your 1,700 down to 16 or 1,550, have the unit rented rather than sit vacant. I think we're going to see some stabilization of apartment values. They just don't go up forever. The last couple of years have been just so crazy. I think the value-added investor, the ones I've talked to, all of a sudden, they're going to think twice about investing in Portland Metro and maybe look for other areas to be. President Trump, no matter what your thoughts are, I think the good thing is for the first time in history, people in commercial real estate have one of their own in the White House. So I think he understands that the field we're in. There's a lot of uncertainty on the national level with what's going on with the new administration, less regulation, privatization of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, lower capital gains, which may result in more sales activity. Talk about lifting the home ownership ratio, which probably would not be good for the apartment market. They're talking about trade wars and infrastructure spending and some of these things, which could, who knows what impact it's going to be. Also, on the political front in the Oregon legislature, there are 6 housing bills coming up. And I mentioned the hearings start tomorrow. And I just pulled the website yesterday and see who all the speakers are, and I can tell you it's going to be a contentious battle with the different factions that are going to be kind of expressing their interest to the legislature. The hearings include rent control, no-cause evictions, you have a homestead exemption, you have a rent guarantee program, you also have a right to Rest Act, and finally you have a home ownership affordable grant program. So I think there's a lot of political battles. There's going to be a lot of fundraising on both sides of the fence there, and I think a lot of contentious battles. There are a lot of strong feelings on both sides, and one of the big wild cards is how all this is going to shake out and what's going to happen. In conclusion, I think one of the things we got to ask is, where are we in the cycle? And where are we going? I think an obvious risk is what happens with the home ownership ratio and what happens with apartment construction. But I think a bigger risk is really what's going to happen with interest rates and what's going to happen with the economy. Now, some brokers and owners report, they say, gee, the market's softening and it's changing. But I don't think we're in a bad market. I don't think we're in a soft market. We're just in a different market. And there are a lot of signs things are flattening out and the political climate is changing. But the market has been so crazy red hot, and it has been just off the charts that people can hardly believe what's happened. I think we're going to get back to a normal market starting in 2017. I think we're going to return to a market which to some people might be considered a weak market, but it's not a weak market. It's because they don't know or have forgotten what a normal market is. So in conclusion, I think we're going to have decent fundamentals in 2017. I think we're going to continue to see a shift from a landlord's market to a tenant's market and a market more in balance this next year. So that's kind of how I see 2017 shaking out. And I am certainly available if there are any questions, if you have time. Good.
So I know that we ran a little bit long. I got started off a little late, so I apologize for that. Out of respect for your time, I know that it's precious. If you need to step out, please do, but I will ask that since Mark is able to stay just a little bit longer to answer some questions, that we'll go ahead and take those questions for those of you who want to ask them. Anybody have a question? Anyone? No? Yes, Anita. You're going to have to stand up and project. Bob. So how will rent control impact brokers pro forma moving forward?
Well, it's one of those things that I think there's still a lot to shake out. I would say if rents are exceptionally low and are, well below market, that's one thing. If they're close to market, I think you can be, pretty safe, adjusting those to market. But if they're really low, somehow build in what some of those costs are going to be, political costs. But I don't have a good answer. I think it's typical that there are a lot of things left to be decided. Yeah.
Can you comment about the impact of where this would be, the changes back to normalization for folks that are out of town, like in the Eugene market? Do you have any sense of, do we trail behind that? Are we 18 months behind it? If you're hot now here, is it going to be hot there?
Unfortunately, I don't really work that market. I'm not up to speed. So I'm going to have to kind of pass on that one because I have to confess, I wouldn't be able to give you a good answer. Yes, sir. I would say the margins are probably the low side, 10 to 12, and maybe high side, 18 to 20. No, it's actual all-in construction costs versus market value. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Is that percentage? Yeah. No. Yeah, percent. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 12% might be the low side. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.